Hi, I'm George from NBI Hockey, and welcome back to Winning on Paper. Brody is not with us today, but we do have a very special guest. Please welcome staff writer from The Athletic. He writes about the Toronto Maple Leafs as well as Canadian soccer, Josh Kloke.
How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming by. We'll just for the next little bit here, we're going to kind of just talk about the Leafs off season. It's been a very interesting summer for them. Obviously, the departure of Kyle Dubas, bringing in Brad Treliving. Uh, a couple roster moves, but nothing like as substantial as a lot of people probably thought. The core four is still there. 1 year deals for Bertuzzi, Domi, and Klinberg, and then the Ryan Reeves contract as well. Samsonov's arbitration filing just got released. I think he asked for 4.9, and the team offered, I think it was 2.5 or 2.6. But other than that, I mean, is this kind of the kind of changes we expected, or has this been kind of a quieter off season than we might have thought?
Personally, I think it's probably a little bit more quiet than anticipated. And I say that because if you look at the way that their playoffs ended, and if you look at the way that Kyle Dubas was very adamant in his belief that he and the team could win with the likes of Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and Tavares and Morgan Riley. I think it's important that we always put Morgan Riley in with the core. He was always adamant that they could win with the core, and he, quite famously said, "I'm willing to bet my job on it," and he did in a way. So when there was change, I think the initial inclination was to think that there would be even bigger change later in the summer because Brad Treliving, as we know, is he's the kind of GM who's never afraid to make a big move. If you look at some of the trades that he made just over the last year and a half of his tenure in Calgary, those were seismic moves, or they would be called seismic moves had they happened to a Leafs GM. So I think that it was it was fair to think that there would be bigger moves, but I think Brad Treliving kind of came in and looked at this Leafs team and said, we can win with this core. We just need to add, and I'm using his term, a little more snot to the group. And I think what's been very clear is that Brad Treliving has kind of made this team kind of in the image of not just his past teams, but a little bit of him, right? He likes players that are heavy. He likes players that make life difficult for the opposition. And I don't think he's done, right? Like we could be having a different conversation, right before the start of training camp. But yeah, just because there hasn't been a big move with one of the core pieces, that's not to say that these moves aren't important, right? Like Tyler Bertuzzi is an upgrade on Michael Bunting as the first line left winger. I think Max Domi certainly bolsters the top six. The top six, I think, is certainly better. But there were a significant number of departures, and I guess it remains to be seen whether or not they have kind of they've filled all those departures, right?
Yeah. The biggest question that I have, at least in the top six, is the second line center spot.
Right.
I know Toronto was very adamant on not playing Tavares there, and it seems like that's just kind of going to be the reality going into the season unless they do something drastic. Because I don't think Domi is necessarily an upgrade at center over Kerfoot or Tavares. Um, do you kind of see them going after somebody, or do you think it's just kind of the market's just kind of not there?
It's difficult because those are typically the moves that you make, at the draft and free agency. Those are trades that are harder, especially, with signing or trying to acquire a second line center. Again, in Toronto is a huge deal, especially when faced with cap limitations that the Leafs have. So I think we would probably see John Tavares, as the second line center to start the season. What happens as the season goes on remains to be seen. Um, y- you know, I, I just think it's probably too difficult a deal to pull off now. Um, but especially with Brad Treliving saying that Max Domi will likely start the year not at center but at wing. But at least with Domi now, you have a bit of flexibility that you can switch things around if you want to. But no, it just seems a little bit too late in the game to make a deal of that size, because at this point you're looking at deals that are a little bit smaller and you're more just filling in around the edges than really adding a top six piece.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, especially now with a lot of teams have their rosters kind of locked in, and uh, July is basically over. You don't really see any of those big moves until like whatever a couple months into the season. Sometimes teams might need a shake up, but
Yep.
moving on to the goalie situation here. Obviously, this is another aspect that Kyle Dubas tried to fix the last couple years. Obviously, with Jack Campbell and then the Murray Samsonov tandem. I'd say that this has probably been a better, like last season was probably better in terms of goaltending. Obviously, it kind of worked out in the playoffs. Although Samsonov didn't play great, it was good enough to get them past the first round finally. Uh, What do you kind of feel about the situation there? And do you think Tree Living looks for an upgrade? I mean, there's like we went into this summer talking about how many goalies were on the market, and we really haven't seen any of them get moved. So it's kind of been one of those things where everybody seemed to have been moving somebody, and then Tristan Jarry was probably the biggest name out there, at least for free agents, and he just re-signed in Pittsburgh. So how do you kind
Well,
of feel about the?
yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's difficult. I don't know how much you could do. Brad Treliving has said that he's essentially he would be comfortable going into the season with the three goalies that they have. And one of the more interesting, he hasn't really rocked the boat, Brad Treliving, as GM. One thing he has said that really stuck out to me is he didn't, at the draft or the day before the draft, he didn't really give Joseph Wall a ringing endorsement. He kind of said that he's seen players that have finished the season strong, maybe not start the season as strong. And so, and then you have, Samsonov filing for arbitration. So even though there's a lot of uncertainty, it seems like the Leafs would probably won't make a significant change. Um, because I don't know if they can, add another piece. I mean, personally, I don't think Joseph Wall has anything left to prove in the AHL. I think Joseph Wall has proven that, he is their backup goalie. He's capable of playing backup goalie, and maybe there's a starter in there somewhere down the road. And I think it's important for the Leafs. I think it's important for any organization to try and draft and develop goalies, and the Leafs haven't done that with James Reimer. Is it a bit of a gamble because, like, Matt Murray is injury prone, Ilya Samsonov is still relatively unproven. I think I'm higher on him than most. And Joseph Wall is still very, very young. Is it a gamble? Sure, but I think you're the top end of your roster is strong enough that you can make that gamble. And I just think at some point if you constantly make changes, it kind of upsets the balance in front of you. So no, I don't think there's much that can be done. I think the biggest question is what's going to happen with Matt Murray. Is he going to start the season with the Leafs? Is he going to be, can he be bought out? Um, you know, can you send him to the Marlies? Right? There's lots of questions there with him, and those are the biggest questions in goal for me.
Yeah, I think one of the other um, issues when it comes to the goalie market, I think this year is just besides obviously the free agents, like a lot of the guys who were potentially being traded didn't have a lot of term left. I mean, guys like Connor Hellebuck only have 1 year, and as great as that would be an upgrade in Toronto, it's like especially with their cap situation and all the pending deals they need to sign, bringing another big name RFA or UFA probably isn't going to be in the best interest of the team unless one of those core four, core five, I guess, are getting moved out in that deal. So that definitely could have played a factor in not targeting one of those guys. And I mean, it seems like the Jets specifically are kind of just okay running into the season with Connor Hellebuck in that looming contract. So
Well, how many the Leafs reportedly want to go short term with Ilya Samsonov, and I'm in favor of that. Like this is just a trend that we're seeing in the NHL. Like,
yeah,
how many goalies in the NHL would you feel confident giving 5+ years to? Like, honestly, 4, 5 goalies, right?
probably.
Outside the elite goalies in the NHL. And again, I'm talking about the absolute best of the bunch. Like how many goalies would you really feel comfortable betting on long term?
Yeah.
Not many, and the Leafs aren't in a position where they have one of those goalies. It's just such a strange position. My editor or one of my editors, James Myrtle, just always likes to say goalies are voodoo, and I'm inclined to agree with him because it's such a tricky position to figure out. I think the Leafs did well, last year with the addition of Curtis Sanford, their goalie coach. You talk to the goalies themselves; they all rave about his ability to kind of calm them down, playing in a volatile market like Toronto. So I think they would feel comfortable going with what they have because again, it's very. I mean, it has to be one of the most difficult positions to fill, a true elite goalie, right? And teams can win. The other thing too is teams can win a Stanley Cup without that true elite goalie, as we saw this year. So I don't know if it's that big of a priority for the Leafs.
Yeah, I know. Just speaking on that I think it was last episode, me and Brody went kind of down the list of the last couple goalies to win a cup, and I mean, you have guys like Jordan Bennington who came out of nowhere. Obviously, Aiden Hill, Matt Murray, and outside of Andre Vasilevsky, who is on a very team friendly deal based on the tax situation in Tampa Bay. The last like we kind of went through it and tried to find like the last time a top five, like actual top five goalie won a cup. And I think we landed on Jonathan Quick in 2012 as
Sure.
being like a top, and that was 10 years ago, right? So obviously it's an important position, but you can kind of catch lightning in a bottle. I mean, even Florida this year with Sergei Bobrovsky, who has not been good since signing that deal, turned into like a crazy elite goalie in over the span of 2 months. So
Yep.
it's
Voodoo.
obviously his contract reflects it, but it,
It's voodoo.
yeah, it's just, I mean, he went in, I think, as their third string going into the playoffs. So, I mean, it really is just random almost. Us outside of like, obviously your Igor Shesterkins and like
Yep.
Saros and all those top guys. As for like prospects coming up for the Leafs this year, obviously I think we expect Matthew Nyes to crack the lineup or at least get a very good shot at cracking the lineup. Robertson's another name I've kind of heard getting thrown around as somebody who's going to get a pretty good look. Is there kind of anybody, obviously with the Leafs cap situation, they kind of need those short term, like young rookie contract guys to come in and make an impact. Is there anybody you're kind of looking at as being somebody who can kind of step up and maybe surprise some people?
Well, it's difficult in Toronto for anybody to surprise anybody the way that all these players are under the microscope all the time. But look, I mean, I think Robertson gets a long look in training camp because it's just been so long since the Leafs have kind of seen him play. I wonder the thing on Robertson that I wonder about is how much, and this is just what I wonder is whether or not Sheldon Keefe has full kind of trust in the player because he's seen him get hurt so many times, and that can kind of only happen so many times before you kind of wonder or you bite your lip every time you send the player over the boards because you wonder what's going to happen. But Nick Robertson is as determined as they come, so we'll see what happens there. I think the player that at least under Kyle Dubas, the organization was very, very high on as a fourth line center was Pontus Holmberg. And he just signed a new deal as an RFA. He's not someone that is a remarkably sexy player because what he does is a lot of kind of the detail oriented defensive work. But in terms of finding him late in the draft and slowly developing him, he was kind of an offense first player in Sweden and he became a very reliable player, and I look at him as maybe someone that can challenge for that fourth line center role. I don't think he's best served in the AHL in terms of development. I think he's an NHL player. It's just whether or not there's a roster spot for him. Another player that I wonder about, considering how well he did last year, is Bobby McMahon. Right, this is a player that transitioned from an AHL deal to an NHL deal. He was a signing out of college. Just an energetic player that does have a goal scoring touch, a really great story. Is there enough there for a top a top nine role. We'll see. I think he'll really challenge for a spot in training camp. So those are the players that I think, will get looks outside of Matthew Nyes. On the blue line, I think it's too early. I really do, in terms of some of the better Leafs defensive prospects coming up. I thought Philip Kroll was probably going to be a seventh defenseman type, but he wasn't qualified. The next two kind of best defensive prospects they have are Topi Niemela and William Villeneuve. I think Villeneuve needs at least one more year in the AHL, and he needs to play kind of top pair minutes. But Topi Niemela, for me, I mean, anybody that's listened to me or follows me on Twitter knows how I feel about the player. I think he's going to be a top four defenseman. I think he's unquestionably their best prospect. But I also think he needs a full season in the AHL to kind of learn how to play on smaller rinks. Right, he only came over at the end of last season, and had a stint just in short stint in the regular season and the playoffs. But the Leafs, organizationally think very highly of him too. He comes over, and in his first few games, he's playing top pair minutes with the Marlies. Running their first power play. They're very high on the player. But I just think that it's such a difficult position to be thrown into. But he's a right shot defenseman. Those are always in demand. I think that it's probably too soon to see him now this season. But I think come 24, 25, we should certainly see, Niemela in the Leafs jersey.
Yeah, I really like Nemela as well. I've had him pretty much at the top of my Leafs prospects list the last year or two. Um, Looking at like the rest of the Atlantic, obviously Toronto expects to be near the top of the standings, if not winning the division. But like Tampa Bay is getting a year older. Boston, I mean, I think Charlie Coyle is currently their number one line center on their roster. Florida, like I mean, barely made the playoffs this year. Who knows if they kind of bounce back. How do you kind of see the Atlantic shaping out here for Toronto, and who do you think is like their biggest threat to winning the division?
I'm never. I remember coming out of, I was literally in the airport. I remember Jonas Siegel and I were walking through the airport after they beat Tampa, and I just kind of said to him, like, I think that's it for Tampa. But I then, if with the benefit of time, I think as long as that core is there, Vasilevsky in there is there, and John Cooper's there, you should never really write them off. I was probably just it was probably just the day after of a Leafs series win, and like like everyone else across the hockey world, I just couldn't believe what had happened. I think that's what's really interesting about the division is there always does seem to be a team that kind of jumps up and surprises people. I think there's a few teams on the cusp. I think it's too soon for Detroit, right? I mean, I think Ottawa and Montreal are still miles away. I could be wrong there, but yeah, and I think it's still a little bit too soon for Detroit to really make a push. But I do wonder about Buffalo.
Yeah,
I just think they've added so many young pieces, and I think this is a group that is really starting to come together. And I think it's a good, locker room, and I think there's a lot more depth there than I think they kind of get credit for.
yeah,
And I just think that there's obviously some high end talent there too. So it wouldn't surprise me if Buffalo makes the playoffs this year. Whether or not they challenge the Leafs, I don't know. But I think they're the team that kind of changes up the alchemy of the division. But look, as long as the Leafs core is who they are, and I don't expect Boston. I don't know how anyone could expect Boston to replicate the season that they had. I think it's probably the Leafs division to lose right now. I think Buffalo makes a push, but we say the same thing every year. It's what they do in the regular season certainly just won't matter as much until what they do in April.
yeah.
So I think it's just going to be another long regular season here.
Yeah, that seems to kind of be the trend like you said, the last couple years. I mean, basically ever since the Capitals series, um, whenever that, I think that was what, 2015, 2016. That's kind of been the thing is just what are they going to do in the playoffs? which is a little unfortunate because they've had some of the best regular seasons in franchise history the last couple of years, and nobody seems to really care.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
Yeah.
we're gonna have to wait and see.
Yeah. All right. One more thing here before we let you go. Women's World Cup coming up. What are your initial thoughts going in? Obviously, I'll be following Canada really closely. Uh,
Yeah,
How do you think it falls out?
well, I think with Canada right now, they have, one of the better squads and one of the better chances. I don't know if they're if they're a real bona fide favorite in the way the United States and Germany are. I think they're probably in that second tier, maybe even just on the outside of the that second tier of teams. Right. You look at the way that they won the gold medal in Tokyo. It certainly wasn't an attack heavy, approach.
Yeah.
Um, I think they're missing a few pieces, as a lot of teams are. I think the loss of Janine Becky to injury really hurts. But I think the question that I have with Canada is just how much the off field turmoil in terms of not getting a resolution with Canada soccer. You look at the fact that they've been kind of thrust into the spotlight, with the parliament hearings in a way that maybe the men's team haven't been, right. Like I guess I just wonder if all of that will have taken a toll. I wondered if the team would be close to getting a deal with Canada Soccer done before the World Cup. I think that would clear the conscience of a lot of players and a lot of people in the organization. But I think that's just kind of hanging over the group a little bit. And so I wonder what kind of impact they'll have. It'll be great to see Christine Sinclair again in her sixth World Cup. She deserves kind of respect for that. But Canada's at their best when they're defending well, and you look at they have a great set of goalkeepers. Their back line is terrific. How many goals they're going to get, we'll see. So I wonder if that'll be enough to go deep. But for me, it's just the off-field piece that's really kind of weighing over them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, let everybody know where to find you.
I mean, I'm on Twitter if that's still a thing at Joshua Kloke. And I'm trying to get threads going, like a lot of people will see. But Twitter is still where I hang out, and you can find my stuff there and at the Athletic before I take off for vacation eventually.
All right, there you go. Awesome. Thank you again for stopping by, and I mean you're welcome back whenever you want. So
I appreciate that. Thank you very
yeah.
much.
All right. Thank you guys again. Make sure you guys follow the podcast on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Like and rate us on Apple and Spotify, and we'll see you guys in the next one.